what this kind of taps into is a, a kind of an idea that became very popular in sort of sociology and sort of in economics and also in biology during the 19th century, which coincided with the rise of the machine, and particularly in agriculture. This was a time when the kind of the old ways of the Lord, kind of providing for a whole community through, owning land and then sort of having people work on the land and also giving parcels of land to loyal employees, and everybody sort of kind of benefiting from this wealth. We moved to an idea of machines like the threshing machine. It was kind of invented in the 19th century, and this put a lot of people out of work, and it caused huge poverty in rural sort of areas. There was mass poverty, particularly in England. I'm thinking of, that this is something that I kind of know a little bit of the history of. So you had this kind of rise in the Industrial Revolution on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you had huge poverty in the rural areas, where a lot of people who depended on the land and on that system lost their jobs. They used to sort of work piecemeal, and a lot of them lost the kind of the hours that they needed to support their families. So similar to now, where we have this kind of 0 hours contract kind of gig economy, which is very precarious for a lot of people. And it's dependent on the sort of the kind of the generosity, all of the sort of the whims of corporations and very wealthy individuals. And so you had the threshing machine kind of come in and take people's jobs, and a lot of people were displaced and ended up either in the cities working in factories, or they immigrated. And the whole kind of colonial project in that sense was this idea of kind of mass immigration through kind of government-funded schemes, was actually designed to try and alleviate poverty in the old world, in Europe and that kind of thing, and give people the opportunity to start fresh. But at the same time, as we know, the whole kind of colonial project also had a very dark side. So, this is something that Andreas Weber really articulates so well in his work, particularly his paper Enlightenment, where he talks about how this idea that has come to dominate, particularly in economics and also in biology to an extent, is this idea of evolutionary biology at its roots in 19th century scarcity theory. So he actually says that the sort of the kind of the liberal economic project, if you like, as well as Darwin's theory of evolution and much of the economics that came out of this period, is all rooted in the same thing. So he says biological, technical, and social progress, so the argument goes, is brought forth by the sum of individual egos striving to outcompete each other. So that, like this idea of survival of the fittest. In perennial rivalry, fit species like powerful corporations or individuals exploit niches, so markets. So you can see this in the colonial kind of framework as well, and multiply their survival rate through profit margins, whereas weaker, in other words, less efficient ones go extinct or bankrupt. So this is the idea, is that we must allow kind of like companies to fail. But if you put this on an individual level, like essentially what you kind of say is that, say, for example, somebody who's a freelancer, who's in the gig economy, if their sort of sources of employment dry up, oh, well, tough. They must just, kind of fall into poverty, much as happened in Victorian times. There was no social security in Victorian times. People relied on the church and on kind of like handouts from the church to sort of get by, particularly in the rural areas. The church, to a large extent, became that sort of social function that is now fulfilled by welfare. And of course, the church relied on donations from both the sort of the congregation and from wealthy individuals, and then towards sort of the end of the Victorian period, they came up with the idea of workhouses, which was supposedly where people could kind of go and get an honest day's. They could do an honest day's work in return for kind of board and lodging. But a lot of these places were run by really cruel people. Think about Charles Dickens and the story of Oliver Twist, and so individuals became kind of trapped in this cycle that they couldn't kind of get out of, and it was usually somewhere that they ended up kind of dying in. It's where families were separated from each other because men and women were sort of separated into different like camps, if you like. So yeah, there's something not very pleasant about it when we start to kind of look in a bit more depth. Um, yeah. So anyway, he kind of says this metaphysics of economics and nature, however, is far more revealing about about society's opinion about itself than it is an objective account of the biological world. And I think that's a really important point to consider. Is it actually a true reflection of nature? When we hear things like Richard Dawkins talking about the selfish gene, is that true, or is that us kind of projecting onto nature? So I think that's something that is really worth kind of thinking about, particularly as I say, when we start to look at Mars in his form as Eros.